Wyoming Territory, late spring of 1883, the rain had been falling hard for hours when Colt Kessler found her. He had not set out to find anyone. He had just been riding the long way home, the scent of wet sagebrush thick in the air, when he caught the flash of a white dress through the storm, caught between the crooked posts of an old split-rail fence. She was chained to it. Her arms were twisted behind her back, skin scraped raw where the iron had rubbed too long. Her dress clung to her like a second skin, soaked straight through. She was shivering, her head bowed low, hair plastered to her face, like she had stopped fighting a while ago. Colt swung down from his horse before his boots even hit the mud. "Miss," his voice cut through the rain like a blade. "Can you hear me?" She flinched but did not speak. He stepped closer, careful not to startle her. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm going to cut you loose." She raised her head at that, her eyes locked on his wide, wet, terrified. That was when he saw the bruises down her jaw, the blood dried around her lip. Colt's jaw tightened. "Who did this?" She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Her lips trembled. She was shaking. He pulled his knife from his belt and crouched low. The chain had been looped through the fence and padlocked, but someone had been in a hurry. It was rusted, barely holding. He wedged his blade under the link and twisted hard until it gave with a snap. She sagged forward and he caught her before she hit the ground. "You're coming home," he said softly, his voice low, solid. "With me." She blinked at him like she was not sure she had heard right. Colt wrapped his coat around her shoulders and lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind her. She pressed back against him without thinking, like she had nothing left to hold up on her own. He held her steady with one arm and guided the horse through the mud with the other. His cabin sat 3 miles out from town, tucked back near the ridge where the trees grew thick. The fire was long dead, but he got it going fast, then laid her down on the cot and fetched a blanket. She was soaked to the bone. "I need to get you warm," he said, crouching beside her. "Can I take off your boots?" She nodded, barely. He peeled them off, then her wet stockings. Her fingers were blue at the tips. He moved quick, pulling off the soaked dress next. She barely flinched. Just sat there, arms crossed over her chest, like she was waiting for something bad to follow. He wrapped her in a quilt and tucked it around her tight. "What's your name?" he asked, voice softer now. She hesitated. "Selene," she whispered. "Selene Oakley," he nodded. "I'm Colt Kessler." They sat in silence for a long moment. The rain beat down on the roof like it meant to wash the world away. She stared at the fire, her hands still trembling. "Who chained you out there?" he asked carefully. "My husband's brother," she said. "He said I was property, that since Miles died I belonged to him." Colt's stomach turned. "You were married." She shook her head. "Not really, not by choice. Miles took me when I was 16. "I never wanted—" "You do not have to explain," Colt said quickly. "Not to me." Her eyes met his then, something fragile curling behind them. "I ran after Miles died, thought I could make it to Rawlins, but they caught me on the trail. You are safe now." Tears welled in her eyes. She turned her face away. He stood. "You need to rest. I will keep watch." But when he turned to walk away, she reached out her hand, catching his. "Please," she whispered, "do not leave me alone." He pulled a chair close to the cot and took her hand in his. Her fingers shook, but she held on tight. He stayed with her all night. By morning, she was still asleep, breathing steady. Her skin no longer looked pale. He had given her dry clothes, one of his shirts, an extra pair of trousers cinched tight with rope, and she had eaten a little, though she barely touched the stew. When she finally opened her eyes, he was at the table sharpening a blade. "You stayed," she said quietly. He looked over. "I told you I would." She sat up slowly, still wrapped in the quilt. "I do not know why you helped me." "I do," he said. "Because no one should ever be treated like that. Because I saw you and I could not ride by." Her eyes softened. "Thank you," he nodded. "You are safe now, Selene. And you do not ever have to go back." She looked down at her hands. "I do not have anyone. You have me," he said, her eyes flicked up. "Why?" Colt set the knife down and stood. He walked over to her, slow but sure. "Because I want you here. Because when I looked at you, I felt something I have not felt in a long time." She stared at him, stunned silent. "I know you have been through hell, but I will not let anyone hurt you again." Selene swallowed hard. Then she reached for his hand. It was small, the touch. But it was the first time she had reached for anything since he found her. I want to believe you, she whispered. He looked her in the eye. Then let me prove it. The next few days passed quiet. She helped him with the horses, fed the chickens, even laughed once when his dog stole a biscuit off her plate. She kept her space, but her shoulders started to loosen. Her voice grew steady. One evening, as the sun dipped gold behind the hills, she stood in the doorway, watching the sky. You never asked if I had anyone before Miles, she said. Colt glanced up from the porch rail. Did you? She nodded. I was supposed to marry a boy back in Georgia, but the war took him. Then my father drank himself to death, and my uncle sold me off for a mule and a saddle. Colt's chest ached hearing it. I am sorry. I stopped believing in good men a long time ago. He took a step toward her. I am not asking you to believe in men. Just in me. She looked at him, long and full. You make it hard not to. He reached for her hand again, and this time she laced her fingers through his. The rain had tried to bury her, but she was standing now whole and free. And Colt knew, without a doubt, that she was never going back to that fence again. The first time Selene stepped past the edge of Colt's yard, it was early morning, and the wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. The ridge behind the cabin sloped up into thick trees, and beyond that, the land stretched wide and quiet. She paused near the garden fence, one hand brushing the rough wood, eyes scanning the distance like she was still expecting someone to come riding in. Colt didn't call to her. He stayed where he was, leaning against the barn door, letting her take the space she needed. She moved careful, like every step on free ground might be taken back. You think the world remembers you, she said after a while, not turning, but it don't. It just keeps on going, same as before. He picked up a piece of rope, started coiling it slow. Maybe it don't remember, he said, but that don't mean you can't leave your mark on it. She turned back to him, arms folded across her chest. And how do you do that? Colt shrugged. You stay. You build something, even if it's small. She looked down at the dirt between her boots. I never built anything. You're here now. Her eyes lifted to meet his, and something in her face shifted, less guarded, not quite open, but softer. She walked back toward him, her pace a little more sure. Do you ever go into town? She asked. Only when I have to, Colt said. Supplies, mail, why? I need to send a letter, she said, to someone who used to know me, just so they know I got out. He nodded once. We'll ride in tomorrow, early. She hesitated. You trust me to come back? I don't reckon trust is about guarantees, Colt said. It's about what you choose to believe. Her jaw worked slightly, like she was chewing on that. I won't run. I know. That night, she took her bowl of stew to the porch instead of staying inside. She sat on the top step with her knees drawn up and her hands wrapped around the tin bowl. Colt joined her, the quiet between them easy. Your folks still living? She asked. No, he said. Pa died out near Fort Fetterman. Ma passed the winter after. She didn't look at him, just watched the last of the light drain from the horizon. It's strange how people leave, some all at once, some slow until you don't notice until they're gone. Colt didn't answer. He didn't need to. She leaned against the post, her shoulder barely brushing it. Did you ever think you'd live out your days alone? She asked. I figured I might, Colt said. Didn't like the thought of it, but I got used to it. She was quiet a long time, then asked, You think a person can choose different even after everything? He turned his head toward her. I think that's the only thing that makes the past bearable. A long breath slipped from her lips. Then maybe I'll try. The next morning, Selene wore one of Colt's old coats and cinched it tight at her waist. The ride into town was slow, the trail still soft from the rain. She rode behind him on the same gelding as before, her arms around his middle, her chin sometimes brushing his shoulder when the horse stepped uneven. No one paid them much mind when they reached town. A few nods, a lifting of fingers from brims. Colt tied the horse near the general store and walked with her up the steps to the post office. Inside, she asked for paper and ink. The clerk gave her a thin sheet and a stub of pencil. She wrote at the counter, her hands steady, her back straight. Colt waited a step behind her, watching the dust motes shift in the morning light. When she was done, she folded the paper, sealed it, and slid it across the counter. Thank you, she said, voice even. They stayed in town long enough to pick up flour, salt, and a bolt of calico in a pattern she chose herself, small blue flowers on a white field. On the ride back, she didn't hold him as tightly, but her hand stayed at his hip, fingers curled into his coat. That night, as he lit the lantern inside, she stood just inside the door, the calico folded under one arm. "I'd like to sew something," she said. "A real dress, one that's mine." "You can use the table," Colt said. "I'll move my tools out the way." She nodded. "Thank you." He watched her a moment longer, then said, "You know, when I found you, you didn't speak for near an hour." "I remember," she said. "You looked like you'd given up." "I had, but not anymore." She didn't answer right away. Then she stepped closer, the fabric still in her arms. "I don't know what I'm moving toward, but it's not back there. That's enough for now." Colt reached out and touched her hand, just lightly. "Then we'll keep moving forward." She looked down at where their hands touched and didn't pull away. Outside, the wind had quieted. The moon rose clear over the ridge, and in the stillness, something settled between them, gentle, steady, and beginning to take root. Colt had never seen a woman take to carving fence posts like she meant to outlast the wind itself. But Selene did just that the following week. She'd asked him that morning, not gently, not shyly, if he had spare cedar and a drawknife. He handed both over without a word, and she'd carried them out behind the chicken coop where the ground rose a little and the wind didn't howl so loud. By dusk, she'd shaved down 4 posts and started on a 5th. Her hands were blistered, but she didn't complain. Didn't speak much either. Just worked until the light went thin and her arms gave out. Colt poured her a basin of water that evening and set it on the porch without comment. She dipped her hands in, winced, and then looked up at him with something like curiosity. "You always let people do what they want." "I don't reckon I tell folks how to heal." Her shoulders eased a fraction. "People used to tell me how to walk, how to talk, how to stay quiet. You're not there anymore, I know. I just don't know who I am without all that. You'll find out." She paused, fingers still in the water. "You think it's worth knowing?" He sat beside her, elbows on his knees. "There's a steadiness in you, not loud, not showy, just there. Like river stone. That's not something I've been called before. I don't say things I don't mean." The next morning, she rose before Colt. He found her outside, a small leather bundle slung over her shoulder. She'd taken one of his spare saddle blankets and stitched it into a crude bedroll. Her coat was buttoned to the throat, and she stood near the edge of the trees, watching the sky. "You going somewhere?" he asked. "Not far. I want to walk. I need to know I can." He nodded slowly. "You want company?" "No. I need to do this part on my own." "You'll be back before dark." She didn't answer right away. "I'll try." He didn't press her, only said, "Take the whistle from the barn wall. If you get turned around, blow it." "I'll come." She returned just as the last of the sun dipped beneath the hills, her hair tangled by the wind, boots covered in red dust. She didn't say where she'd gone, and Colt didn't ask. That night she sat at the table and laid out a folded square of paper. It held a map, rough, hand-drawn, the lines shaky in places. "I used to draw trails when I was a girl," she said. "Not real ones, just places I imagined, where I might go if I ever got the chance." He studied the lines, the small symbols she'd sketched: trees, a river bend, a ridge. "I made this today," she said. "It's not much, but it's mine. You thinking of leaving?" "No," she said. "I'm thinking of staying, but I want to know what the land looks like when I'm not afraid of it." Colt touched the edge of the paper. "That's a good start." She looked at him then, long and without blinking. "I don't want to be someone who waits anymore. I want to choose things, even if they're small." He held her gaze. "You get to choose everything from here on out." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It held weight, like something settling into place. Later, after the lamps were turned down, she paused at the doorway to her room. "Colt," he turned from the hearth. "Yeah, I want to plant something, not just flowers, food. Something that grows roots. We'll get seed from the store next trip." She nodded once, then hesitated. "And I've been thinking about fixing the back fence, the one near the wash. I'll help you." She didn't smile, just gave a slow, thoughtful nod. He watched her disappear into the room, the door left cracked behind her. That spring, the land softened. Snowmelt fed the creek bed and birds nested in the eaves of the barn. Selene woke early most days, her boots already on by the time Colt stepped outside. She dug furrows with her hands, filled them with onion sets and corn kernels, and a few beans she'd found in a dusty jar near the back of the cupboard. She never asked him to work beside her, but when he did, she didn't stop him. One evening, she stood barefoot in the garden, her toes pressed into the turned soil. Colt watched from the porch, a coil of rope in his lap. "You always this patient?" she asked. "No, so why now?" "Because you matter." She looked at him, eyes steady. "You don't say things you don't mean." "No." She walked toward him, slow but sure. When she reached the porch, she stood between his knees, her fingers brushing his jaw. "I don't know what comes next," she said. "You don't have to." "I want to stay." "Then stay." Her fingers closed around his hand. "I want more than just safety." His other hand came up, rested at her hip. "So do I." The kiss was quiet, but it didn't ask permission. It spoke of all the mornings she'd woken to light instead of fear, of all the nights he'd waited without asking for anything back. It was steady, like her, like him. When she pulled back, she was breathing uneven. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. He rested his forehead against hers. "Good. That makes two of us." The barn roof had begun to sag. Colt noticed it first during a stretch of dry weather, when the sun angled just so and caught the dip in the ridge line above the hayloft. It wasn't urgent, but he'd have to brace it before snowfall came again. He mentioned it over breakfast, wiping biscuit crumbs from his plate. "I'll help," Selene said, tying her braid with a scrap of cotton. "You ever frame rafters?" "No," she answered, "but I've balanced on worse things." He didn't argue. She had a way of offering herself to the work that made refusal feel like disrespect. They stripped the loft down first, tossing old feed sacks and broken shingles into a pile by the fence. She worked alongside him without hesitation, climbing the ladder, hammer in hand, sweat darkening the back of her collar. By mid-afternoon, her knuckles were scraped and her sleeves rolled high. "You don't let anything stop you," Colt said, handing her the next board. She set it in place, careful with the angle. "Stopping's easy, I've done enough of it." They finished before dusk, the last brace driven firm beneath the ridgepole. He stepped back to survey it, arms crossed. Selene sat on the edge of the loft, one boot swinging. "You ever think about turning this into something more?" He frowned. "The barn?" "No," she said, glancing down at him. "This place, the land, making it enough for more than just us." He climbed up beside her, the ladder groaning under his weight. "You mean children?" "I mean a life that doesn't end with just surviving." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I always figured I'd be alone, not unhappy, just quiet." "You still could be," she said. He looked over at her. "You thinking of leaving?" She shook her head. "I'm thinking of planting trees." He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "You want to raise a family here?" "I don't know yet," she said. "But I know I want to stay long enough to find out." He nodded, slow and certain. "Then we'll build it steady." They climbed down together, the sun catching the dust in the air like gold. Selene picked up a length of twine and began tying the feed sacks closed, her movements practiced. Colt fetched the wheelbarrow from behind the shed. That night, she didn't go to her room. She stood by the small window over the stove, hands clasped behind her back. "I never knew quiet could feel like this." He waited. She turned to him then, her expression unreadable but sure. "I want to share your bed." He didn't move closer. "You sure?" "I'm not afraid," she said. "And I don't want to be apart from you anymore." He stepped toward her, slow as always, and touched her cheek. Her eyes closed at the contact, quiet, not trembling. When she opened them again, he kissed her the way he'd built everything else between them, without rush, without doubt. In the dark, they undressed with care, not urgency. Her body bore no apology, and he met it with reverence, not pity. She moved with intention, not hesitation. When she lay down beside him, their hands met between their chests. Later, when the wind picked up outside, she whispered, "You made me feel like I belonged before I believed I could." "You always deserved to," he said. "I just gave you the space to see it." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder. "We're going to be all right." There wasn't a trace of uncertainty in her voice. Colt stared up at the ceiling, the scent of cedar still on their skin. "We already are." In the early morning, she rose first. He watched from the bed as she lit the stove and poured water into the tin kettle. She hummed under her breath, low and tuneless, but it wove through the room like something permanent. She turned as the fire caught him watching, and didn't look away. It was the first morning neither of them felt like they were waiting for something to go wrong. The tool shed had been leaning east since before Colt bought the land, but it wasn't until a late spring wind peeled back part of the roof that he decided to rebuild it. Selene watched him from the garden fence, her arms dusted with flour from a morning spent kneading dough. "I could measure the frame," she said, "if you mark the line." Colt set down the hammer. "You sure? I've got a straight eye." They worked side by side in the afternoon light, her fingers steady on the carpenter's square, his grip firm on the saw. She didn't ask what he wanted from the shed, and he didn't offer. It wasn't about storage anymore. It was about shaping something new between them, one board at a time. When the structure stood upright, square and true, Selene stepped back to survey it. "We could hang some dried herbs in there. Maybe keep salt pork through the winter," he nodded. "If we rig a smoke shelf, it'd draw just fine." She met his gaze, brow lifted. "You ever built a smokehouse?" "No," he said, "but I reckon we can figure it out." That evening, as the stars came out soft and slow, she brought out 2 cups of chicory and sat beside him on the porch bench. The cicadas had started up in the trees, a low thrum that settled into the bones. "I want to learn to shoot," she said, eyes on the dark horizon, "not for protection, just so I know how." Colt looked over, his mouth tugging briefly. "You have a strong grip, I can teach you." "I don't want to be helpless again, not even in memory." "You're not." "I know," she said. "But I want to feel it in my hands." The next morning, he took her out to a clearing north of the pasture where the ground rose gentle and dry. He laid a pine plank against a stump and handed her the smaller of his rifles, the one with the worn leather sling. "This'll kick some," he warned. "But it's steady." She braced the stock against her shoulder, her breath even. When the shot cracked, the birds scattered all at once. The bullet struck just left of center. Colt glanced at her. "You've got a natural line." She lowered the barrel. "I used to watch the men shoot when I was a girl. I paid attention." They reloaded, fired again, then again. She didn't flinch, didn't second-guess herself. By the 6th shot, she hit the mark dead center. They walked back slow, the rifle slung over her back. She didn't speak, and he didn't push her to. It was a different kind of quiet between them now, not the silence of fear, but the kind that came after something earned. A week later, he found her in the loft, sorting through scraps of muslin and ticking from an old chest. She held up a worn square of cloth, pale blue with faded stitching. "I was thinking of making a cradle," she said, not looking up. "Not for now, just for someday." He stepped into the light from the narrow window, the dust rising around his boots. "You want children?" "I think I do," she said. "With you." He moved closer, slow as always, and knelt beside her. "Then we'll make one, when you're ready." She nodded once, her fingers tightening over the cloth. "I want to be the kind of man who makes you feel safe bringing life into this world," he said. "You already are," she said. "I just needed time to believe it." That summer, they built a chicken run behind the barn, dug a second well closer to the cabin, and hauled lumber down from the ridge to frame a second room, something Selene insisted on, in case they ever needed space for more. She stitched curtains from the calico she'd chosen months before, now soft from washing, and hung them with straight pins hammered into the window frame. Colt watched her from the doorway, arms crossed, the light casting her silhouette long and certain against the wall. "I never thought I'd live in a house that felt like mine," she said. "You built it," he said. "Of course it's yours." She turned, her voice low. "I meant with someone who sees me." He stepped forward, his hands warm on her waist. "I see you, every part of you. And there's not one thing I'd change." She leaned into him, her breath steady against his collar. "Then I'm not afraid of anything that comes next." They married in early autumn. There was no preacher, just a cleared patch of earth near the cottonwoods, 2 witnesses from town, and the sky open above. Selene wore a dress she made herself, the hem stitched with tiny blue flowers. Colt wore his best shirt, the collar pressed flat. When they spoke their vows, it wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. She promised to stand beside him without silence or shame. He vowed to never turn away, no matter the storm. They sealed it with a kiss, and the wind stilled like it had been listening. That night they danced beneath the stars, no music but the rhythm of crickets and the rustle of leaves. Her bare feet pressed against his boots as they turned slow, the lantern light catching in her hair. Years passed. Selene planted trees along the fence line, apples and chokecherry, a few cottonwoods for shade. The cradle she'd imagined became real, carved from pine and rubbed smooth with beeswax. When their daughter arrived one spring morning, Colt held her with hands steady and sure, and Selene wept, not from fear, but from joy so deep it rooted in her chest. They named the baby June, after the day the rains stopped the year Selene was found. In the evenings, Selene would sit by the hearth, June asleep in her lap, and Colt would carve animal shapes from scrap wood: foxes, elk, a coiled rattler with a smooth tail for little hands. The land held them season after season. Not untouched by grief or hardship, but never bowed by it either. They had built something lasting, something honest, and they lived there together every day after in a love that asked nothing but truth and gave everything in return.